security innovation panel on the security track here at the AWS Public Sector Summit. My name is Mark Ryland. I'm the Chief Solutions Architect for the public sector team at AWS. I also work with tons of great partners and, of course, customers to help build this exciting ecosystem. So it's great to be here this afternoon. So my first question for the panel is, I'm trying to understand, what is this? I've noticed it on the podium of every talk. It's some kind of a lens cleaner and washcloth or something. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of curious. Next question will be for the panelists. So we have a great group here today with great backgrounds on the topic of security innovation. I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll have them say a couple words about their background, their career, and what brings them to this place, this spot. We'll start with, just go down the list. So joining us from Trend Micro is Ed Cabrera. He's the Vice President of Cybersecurity Strategy. John Jacobs, next on the line there, is the Vice President of Cloud Security Architecture at Fortinet. So welcome to John. We also have from Splunk, Kathy Wang as a Senior Security Strategist. Welcome to Kathy. And finally, John Landwehr, who's the Chief Technology Officer for the Adobe Public Sector team. So welcome to the panelists. So we'll mix it up and start on the far end. John, give us a couple-minute introduction to yourself and your view on this topic, and we'll go down the list.
Sure. I'm John Landwehr, Public Sector CTO at Adobe. Been with the company going on 14 years or so. I think we've been partners with Amazon since about 2008, bringing a number of our enterprise solutions into the cloud and working together on things like FedRAMP and a number of other security initiatives. I think what we see is some significant innovation going on in the security world today would probably be in a few areas of one, increased attention on multi-factor authentication. We're big fans of that. We all have way too many passwords to remember that are upper, lower, number, symbol, 16-character, change every month kind of thing. And certainly with, especially in the federal government, the PIV card as part of HSPD 12 is great not only for letting you in the building, but also increasingly authenticating you to federated services inside and outside your organization. So that may be one topic we can talk about today. Another is we've been through the FedRAMP Gauntlet, offering platform as a service, as well as software as a service. And I actually see FedRAMP as a source of innovation in driving efficiency for the government when it comes to security and accreditation of cloud service providers that can be reused across the agencies. So that might be another topic. And then the last one is that we recognize even with FedRAMP, a lot of organizations are still nervous about having anything outside their perimeter from a cloud security perspective. And we have some ideas that we've been collaborating on across the agencies that are providing data-centric security approaches to persistently protecting your information, independent storage and transport, anywhere it goes, not only within your agencies, but also across agencies and out to various cloud service providers.
Thanks, John. Kathy?
So I'm Kathy Wang, and I've been a security practitioner for over 16 years now, focused specifically on security operations and applied security research. So I've been kind of on the forefront of a lot of different research efforts and projects. I'm widely recognized as a malware expert and also as the first person in the world to develop an open source sandbox for file detonation, which is widely used by a lot of commercial products today. So I know innovation really well. And I joined Splunk about a year ago. And as a security strategist at Splunk, not only do I do research, but I say about 40% of Splunk's customers use Splunk for security use cases. And in public sector, it's even higher than that for that percentage. And so, we're really excited to work with our customers. We've made a huge investment in security. Last year, we acquired a company called Cabrera, which is now rebranded as Splunk UBA for user behavioral analytics. So we have a lot of machine learning security use cases going on, and also security operations work. So I'm really excited to talk to you here today about innovation. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Kathy. James, or do you go by, I'm sorry,
John.
John? You go by John?
That's right. I don't go by James. That's, no, I'm kidding.
Makes sense.
So filling in for James. My name is John
Okay, I'm
Jacobs
sorry.
from
Yeah,
Fortinet.
sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I have the pleasure of leading our cloud solutions architecture teams as well as the SE organizations that have our strategic accounts. So it gives us a good purview, gives me a good purview over the 250,000 customers we've got around the world. Fortinet has grown from a hardware vendor, a hardware security manufacturer, and I'm proud to say that as we move into the cloud, we're good to recognize that what that's given us is threat intelligence. So threat intelligence from the approximately 2 million devices we have deployed around the world is really the ability to take that back to our threat database and a service that we call FortiGuard, but applying that regardless of where you are in what format. So what was once the perimeter firewall in a hardware device or some sort of appliance, as we all recognize, now becomes, as workload shifts to the cloud, either some type of hybrid approach or a true public cloud-based solution. So I would put forth almost an argument to the fact that the belief that risk is parallel with innovation. I do think while having more data and having more data in more places does in itself create a larger target, I think conversely, having IT organizations that are already overburdened now be able to focus on what they can really have as a core competency outside of these lengthy process of product evaluation and testing that are still important, but let them focus there and let platform providers like AWS shift what they do well so people can have that laser focus on allowing them to innovate and quickly come to market. So I've got a background in operations and from the infrastructure side, so I think that's important that no matter what's deployed, consistent security practice, and our mission is to have that consistent security profile in every product, regardless of deployment. So thank you for having me here.
Thanks, John. Ed?
Ed Cabrera. I just joined Trend Micro 9 months ago. Before that, I was with the Secret Service for 20 years. There I ran our computer forensics program, our network intrusion responder program. I was also an advisor to the NKIC for a period of time. So since I've been at Trend Micro, it's been really working and building that relationship that we've had with AWS for quite some time on really being able to leverage all of our security solutions. Trend Micro is a global security software company, so all of our tools are geared towards, and where we invest in automation is really that automation and orchestration piece, I think, which is critical right now. And the big piece for us is also management, right? Not only do you scale performance in the cloud, but you want to scale security in the cloud. So that's a lot of our investments is really focused on that effort. Me personally, what I bring is also when I was with the Secret Services, working with DHS, S&T, and trying to identify new technologies, trying to identify not only the gaps that we had, but also where can we fill it with a traditional security solutions or other companies and organizations. So really trying to blend that gap and help our customers really do that. And that's really happens through our strategic partnership, such as with AWS.
Thank you. So we've got some great themes already just from the introduction. We have themes around innovation versus risk, themes around the shift from hardware-based appliances to sort of software systems as an example. Things like sort of endpoint security. Do you scale security to lots of nodes? Do you try to keep things centralized? Data protection, data-centric protection is a big theme. Once data leaves a highly secure system and goes into the wild, is there a way to continue to have a protection model of some kind? Great themes for a security innovation panel. So thank you for those introductions. So let's I guess shift a little bit to that topic and step back a little bit about what exactly innovation is and what its presence is in this market space. And I think there's a couple things we could talk about. One is think about to what extent is the technological changes in innovations changing user behavior, changing business models, or vice versa. So you can see the impact of new technologies on innovation in business or mission and agency behavior, and sometimes conversely, that if you have an innovative business process or model, then that will drive change in terms of the tools and the technologies. And I think we see both of those kinds of things going on. as we look at the cloud transition. So maybe the panelists could comment a little bit about that. Sort of, is it technology driving business innovation, agency mission innovation, or vice versa, or a little bit of both?
I would say a unique answer would be, I think a lot of it's being driven, unfortunately, by the threats that we see. We talk about the threat intelligence. Now we're seeing a lot more of, again, the automation orchestration really happening within the criminal underground, which are really conducting these attacks. So how do you really scale and be able to meet those type of threats? So I think it's a mixture of a lot, right? It's what you should be seeing from a threat perspective, but also what you should be doing from a vulnerability perspective, how you're protecting yourself. So I think a lot of that is really driving the innovation piece.
Kathy, what about Splunk? What's your perspective on that?
So I'm a technologist at heart, so I will never say that business innovation is ahead of technology innovation. That never happens. Right? So, so I would say technology is definitely the lead. And at Splunk, we just this year, RSA announced a adaptive response initiative. And this is, I've been in security operations environments for many different government agencies. I was a defense contractor for many years. And I would have to say that scaling operations and also doing a lot more automation is more innovative now, and that's the trend that I'm seeing. So people need help. I mean, there's not enough analysts to do the job, right? And there's more data coming in every year. So with adaptive response, you're doing a more automated process for having all of the different security devices in the network have a centralized point that can then be rule-based correlated, and then actions can be taken so that we can be more proactive rather than reactive. And that's where things are going from an innovation standpoint.
John, what's the perspective of Adobe on that?
Well, I think it's a balanced approach because there are a lot of places where the business wants to drive innovation by perhaps going more digital online. They want to have people complete a process, self-service online, so that people don't have to show up in line to government agencies or even call on the phone. That drives then innovation, saying, okay, well, how do I know who's at the other end of the pipe that's going to be doing these processes? How do I know that fraud's not going on? How do I know that the bad guys aren't going to come in and steal all the PII that we've been collecting online? A lot of which are just extensions of what has been focused on business processes already, that even when the government was collecting paper with PII on it, they still had to protect it so it wouldn't accidentally get to the wrong place. But of course, now digital information can leave the room and travel the world faster than the piece of paper reaches the door. So it's, I think, accelerated the need to look at a lot of different approaches on how to apply security, not only very quickly, very cost effectively, but it still has to be easy to use. And I think that's a big part of the innovation that has been taking place and needs to continue, because if security is too difficult to implement for the administrators or create some sort of friction to the business process or something out to consumers, people stop using it, and that's not what we want either. So I think it has to be hand in hand in making sure that IT and the mission are working together.
What do you think about the comments that we're getting a lot lately from Tony Scott, the federal CIO, about how we've tended to sort of create digital copies of our old paper business processes as opposed to a true digital model for business flow? It's maybe getting a little bit of far field from specific focus on security, but your comment really resonates with me on that. Do you see that, and how do you see that changing, or are there better models that would actually lead to better security rather than just replicating a paper process with a browser?
I agree completely that as a lot of these digital processes are being examined, the first step many organizations take is, oh, well, we had this 8.5 by 11 form, and I just want to fill it out online. Yeah. And now when you've got smartphones, nobody really wants to pan and zoom around an 8.5 by 11 document on a small screen. I mean, even on tablets, it's not great. So taking a look at the end-to-end business process to say, what's the minimum amount of information I want to collect? How do I need to make sure there's proper consent, approval, acknowledgement on what I'm doing as a transaction, and looking at the overall risk of that transaction to say, well, what could go wrong? What kind of fraud could be committed? What kind of spillage could occur by this information? And looking at a completely different user interface, which I think is interesting now, is a lot of the public-facing commercial applications aren't just websites anymore. It's apps, right? Because you get a better user experience, much more tailored to you. Plus, you can take into account other information in a security context, like location. So if I am depositing checks or paying bills on my smartphone, it knows that I'm here in the DC area. But if all of a sudden, somebody adds another payee to my account and the phone says it's in Kazakhstan, risk procedures might say they want to take a closer look at that before they add that payee. And getting that location information is much more seamless when you're using an app. So I think looking at that overall experience, again, is very important.
Yeah, that's great. So John, I want to turn to you and talk about something I see from the AWS side. We have partners who have taken traditional security appliances, virtualized those, provide some very nice, cool technology that runs in the virtual machine service and integrates with their console, so you can see a unified view of your on-prem and your cloud assets. We've seen vendors take that kind of to the next step, which is, well, that's cool, but we really want the elasticity, the auto-scaling, so that kind of next step is to add this kind of automatic scale up and down for some of those things. And then at the other hand, I think like Trend, for example, great endpoint security, saying, virtual machines will come and go, but as long as they're protected, there's no need for the sort of the central appliance. I'd like for maybe you guys to comment on what trends you see. I see all three of those things happening. They all seem reasonable. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on so where do you see the innovation and the trends in the market? John, why don't you start?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the autoscale is really a key. I mean, one of the big ideas with innovation in the cloud is the ability to scale rapidly and do it efficiently. So most customers, when they do that, want to have a baseline or something that they know is functional. And then there's that event, right? The Super Bowl event or something that happens where the infrastructure should scale automatically or automagically, as some people say. And that's the beauty of cloud. And with security, it has to scale synonymously. It has to be parallel. And that's been really paramount to our belief is that security platform or that security stance has to be at the level of all the infrastructure behind it without gap, without compromise. And the management platform should just recognize it as a larger device or a larger host of devices. So we don't disrupt and we don't penalize the growth, because I do think that is the number one, I would say, that was a great point, which is I think that innovation has the ability to better the business drivers. So take that paper form and say, well, what were we doing wrong? What was missing? That was almost the simple or the lazy approach. So I think we can better it with this, with the scale.
I think he said it perfectly about scaling, right? From the whole idea of scaling security at the same time from a performance perspective, right? So the idea of not only doing that at an automated fashion, but going back to what you were saying is having visibility control across your hybrid and your private and public and endpoint, right? Coming in, bringing it back to a control manager. I think that is the visibility control for security is incredible, but also you add in compliance, right? So it's critical to do that. And so I think what John was alluding to, I think with cloud, it gives us a great opportunity to do that and really throw out the old security handbook, so to speak, and really say, how can we do this and how can we streamline it and be much more effective with a smaller group of qualified individuals?
Another theme that I'm seeing that I think applies, to at least the three security vendors here is the use of a sort of SaaS platform as a way to manage both on-prem and cloud infrastructure. So that's an interesting trend. In fact, it's sort of an irony sometimes that people say, oh, I'm nervous about going to the cloud, but oh, my security vendor actually runs all my security analytics in the cloud. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's going to, already it's a common pattern. Is that a strong trend going forward? And what are the advantages of that approach?
Absolutely, but I'll let...
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So in all the years that I've been, kind of dealing with products and seeing what people like to do, and I was also a former CISO, there's a lot of reluctance from the security industry, especially among CISOs and directors of security operations, to allow their data to be on someone else's cloud infrastructure. And that's certainly how people used to think. And now that tide is turning, right? So a lot of people are saying, it's really expensive for us to run our own infrastructure, do this on our own cloud infrastructure, and then also go through compliance and get everything certified and have our own staff of people to do all that. So more and more customers at Splunk also are looking to get the Splunk cloud service, right? So that is an affirmation of that particular thought view. But in terms of performance, there's a challenge there too, because it's not just about security, it's also about, how do we do performance-wise when we have our data on some other cloud infrastructure as opposed to on-prem. So that's something that we all, and I believe we probably all have that in common, have to work through with customers.
Any other comments on that?
No, I think, leveraging cloud for us is incredibly important. We have our smart protection network that really fuels all of our tools from the endpoint network and cloud. But I think you can't get away with it, get away from it, so to speak. You have to leverage it not only from just day-to-day operations and management, but also from the threat intelligence perspective. I think it's key, right? The innovation piece and really the investment side of the house, it really is on that leveraging cloud and the analytics go along with it.
Right. So in the aggregated platform, you're getting some immediate benefits just in terms of threat intelligence, right? If you're looking across a bunch of customers with their permission, obviously, and looking at aggregated behaviors, that's a big win compared to creating a set of stovepipe environments, which is what we tended to do in the past. Let me ask this maybe a little more controversial question. So a lot of times when people think about innovation, they think about experimentation, and if you're thinking about, experimentation is an important way to innovate. You try things, right? Trial and error. But experimentation means that you're going to fail. In fact, failure is really a part of experimentation. If you're not failing, you're probably not doing a very good job at experimenting. So how does that play into the security discussion? Because those words sound like they don't really go together. How can I be working on improving my security, but I have failures? I mean, what is your experience on that? Is this an area where you have to be so cautious that you've got to, maybe hold back a little bit on some of the experimentation, or are there ways to do experimentation and get the innovation benefit from that can be done in a reasonably safe way, or at least where the risk benefit is clear? What are some thoughts on that topic?
So I would say that it actually allows people to prioritize, and it is a good point, because I'm a firm believer in that if you aren't failing, you're not taking the risk. But I think what it does allow people to do is push the workload in a prioritized fashion. So maybe it is some sort of development workload that they can move to the cloud more quickly. Not saying that they sacrifice security, that's never our intent, but if there's a perceived level of risk, that helps people from a business transaction perspective overcome that hurdle of, can I really afford to do this? And I think once you do, and once people realize that we can provide seamless security, it gives them the ease to then move those more business critical applications and the more sensitive data applications right behind it. So I would say you almost want to leverage that as a little bit of an ease into people and from a business driver.
Comments on risk?
So in my experience, it's really, really important as a security researcher to have the resources to experiment and try different projects and approaches. The best innovation comes from the ability to look at what's out there and then figure out what the gaps are in maybe not so obvious ways, and then figure out how to bridge those gaps. And that's where a lot of new cool technology comes from, that kind of thought. So it's important to try things and to fail at it. And that's something that I don't see enough in industry right now, in security industry, in terms of funding. All right, so as a former director of research and development, I can say that that's definitely something that needs to improve. And if we're going to do better in security, there needs to be that commitment from C-levels for funding those initiatives. Now, at Splunk, we also do fund research, but we try to do this fail, but fail fast kind of mantra. So don't take like 5 years to fail at something, right? So, maybe 6 months, a year, short-term applied efforts, but that's what needs to happen more.
I think the other thing is that historically it's been too difficult from a time, cost, infrastructure perspective to try things, because you find some great new piece of technology and it's like, okay, where am I going to set this up? What data center am I going to put it in? Do I have the budget? Do I have the budget also to make sure I get some sort of ATO if it's going to touch my network? All the ongoing costs that go along with it. And fortunately, the cloud's making it a lot easier, especially as a number of technology providers are offering FedRAMP solutions. So it's like, okay, you can say you want to try this technology for a short period of time. They already have a virtual machine created. It already has a FedRAMP ATO, so you've got all your security paperwork. They're going to host it on your infrastructure, so you don't have to set anything up on-prem. And that's enabling things like our enterprise rights management. We can do pilots very quickly, leveraging PKI for authentication, so you're not cross-connecting LDAPs and a bunch of things that used to be required and now aren't, thanks to federated identity, plus all the security paperwork that can be done very quickly. So it's like, after you make the decision of you want to try something new, how quickly can you see those results? Because if it's going to take a year for your application to even get online to see what it might do, that's kind of discouraging. So I think that's where industry is really trying to move with an advancement of cloud services to get more functionality to you more quickly in a secure environment.
That's a great point, and I want to kind of circle back a little bit to something that John said. I think that was insightful, and we see in our customer base. So there's this underlying issue and theme that I want to get to more directly, which is just how secure is the cloud? Is it more or less secure, et cetera? But I think everyone agrees that there's a learning process involved in cloud platforms, and it's a very good idea to start with relatively low risk, test and dev, experimentation, proof of concepts. In other words, kind of get your feet wet, get comfortable, get your operations, your developers comfortable with systems. Is that a theme that you see in your customer base of not so much saying, oh, I don't trust the cloud, I'm going to put this low risk data, but rather I'll start with a low risk, I'll do experimentation, I'll do POCs, and then go from there. Is that what are you seeing in terms of what you see in your customer base?
I could speak from experience too, that being from the Secret Service, us really having a mandate, right? The cloud first strategy, moving to the cloud. I think your point is right on. Is a lot of it is the awareness, right? Is it really as secure as you need to have it, from a security perspective, obviously, but from a compliance perspective as well. And I think what you're seeing a lot is exactly dipping your toe into it. And from the Trend Micro perspective, we're trying to enable that as well, and being able to allow our customers or potential customers to do their POC within AWS, for example. So these are the things that we're seeing it, and so we're trying to do everything we possibly can to enable that education and awareness to say, okay, not only is this secure and this is how we do it through the partnership with AWS, but this is how you can actually test it out. This is how you can dip your toe into that cloud water. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly something that what we're seeing now from that perspective.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think that the other point that I like to drive back to people is this fear of how secure is the cloud is, and there is an exception to this in the government space, but from a private space, challenge people to find out the security in their own data center. People say, what type of security do you have? Physical layer security in a data center. I think I've been witness to, most people have probably been witness to, levels that are certainly not taken, certainly nowhere near what's taken by Amazon and AWS for, again, going back to the core competency of what they can offer, that take that off the table. That if you have DevOps, if you have IT staff, is it really their core competency to drive a layer 1 security solution, to guide physical manifestation, to deal with backup power? These aren't things that they should be dealing with. So let the people that are deal with them, and then therefore we build on that and just ramp up the innovation piece.
Good.
Yeah, so I agree with that. There are people who specialize in doing certain types of things. So if you're asking your IT staff to manage a service that they're not familiar with, that's a disaster recipe. So however, the other thing that you can do for cloud services to get that confidence and trust is you can have customers as lighthouse customers, right? So if they've had a really good experience, then they're willing to talk to peers in the same industry sector and give their kudos to the service, and then you can build that way as well. People, I find that most people are not pioneers, right? Pioneers are the ones that have the arrows on their backs, right? Most people are settlers. So they come in after the pioneers come out. So It's very much that way with cloud security. You have to get the endorsement and the buy-in from certain customers in certain industry sectors and then build from there.
And we're really starting to see that. I mean, I've been at Amazon almost 5 years. I'm kind of an old timer for our organization. And when I first started and we talked to public sector customers, I mean, we couldn't get 2 words out of our mouth before security was like immediately like, how can how can the public cloud be secure? And people have these, I mean, it's natural. They have these sort of mental images of Gmail and other kind of consumer services, and they're thinking, this is crazy, they'll mine my data. You know, they just have these models of how the world works, and it takes a while to overcome those and get people to understand that, you know, it's a core part of our business, the absolute isolation of one customer from another. You know, multi-tenancy is not a scary thing once you understand the model and how it works. All these things have happened, but now we're finally starting to see the shift that I alluded to earlier. I'll give you a couple of quotes, and I'd like you folks to comment on them. Tony Scott mentioned before, U.S. government CIO, he says, I see the big cloud providers in the same way I see a bank. They have the incentives, they have the skills and abilities, they have the motivation to do a much better job of security than any one company or organization or agency can probably do. I think the better bet is to get to the cloud as quick as you can, because you're almost guaranteed to have better security than you will in any private thing that you can do. So that, I don't think anybody would have said that 3 or 4 years ago. I wish they had. And of course the platforms have matured too, and they have a lot more features, and you know, it's much more proven, especially through things like third-party audits and certifications, that it's not just a vendor saying, hey, I'm amazing, I do this stuff. It's like, no, they're actual third-party experts who say, yeah, we've actually done all the inspections, we've done all the penetration testing, all the process and people stuff that we need to do, and here's a detailed report with a ton of evidence that it backs up the claims that the vendor is making. So there have been a lot of changes and improvements, but again, that kind of a quote to us is kind of a fascinating, you know, shift in terms of the discussion. Is that an outlier, or do you think that's becoming more typical in terms of how people view the cloud revolution?
I know for certain that we've seen more and more people. That was taboo years ago, just a few years ago. No one wanted to raise their hand, right? If you asked where their data was, it's somewhere. It's somewhere in the middle of the country where we can't tell you. It's in a data center. That's really changed. And I think, and I'd also take one other point from that. When you talked about penetration testing, validation, think of the speed at which we can now do that. So we don't have to give a third-party access to a data center, some place where we didn't want to disclose to perform those types of tests. Now we can have the data, put it in a public cloud, run the types of tests and test tools and vendors, which are also coming to the public cloud forum rapidly, and actually validate these solutions and prove that they are secure and they are valid. So I think it's a great quote.
I think there's also ties perhaps to FedRAMP and all of this, because in the early days of cloud, it was kind of like, okay, well, you just have to trust that the cloud service provider is doing all the right things. But in the spirit of trust but verify, FedRAMP's providing a great conduit to do that, because you know they're not only implementing the right controls, they've documented all the controls, they've brought in the third-party assessment organization to make sure what was documented, actually make sure what was implemented meets all the specs that are out there, and then you've got agency CIOs that have attested to it for an ATO. You know, that certainly provides a lot more trust for the community to know that the CIO's friends across other agencies have looked at these things. And it's great that you can not only see a vendor listed on the FedRAMP website, but agencies can go and request the security documentation, right? So you're not just seeing the company logo on the site, but look, you can go out and request all the docs. And they're very, very thorough in thousands of pages to review with all sorts of great things that the vendors have done. So I think on one hand, they had to have the easy button of some sort of good housekeeping underwriter's laboratory seal of approval that people could understand, but yet also explain all the test cases behind it so that organizations that are making this migration from just, oh, I want a test environment to a cloud, to, oh, I just want to publish information from the cloud, to now organizations are really doing transactions in the cloud, which increases PII, PHI, perhaps intellectual property as well, that you certainly have to take a much stronger security posture, but knowing that you've got that baseline, and also knowing that you can go up the entire stack, not just, oh, it's a FedRAMP infrastructure as a service, but now there are vendors that are going platform as a service all the way software as a service is what you should be looking at from an agency perspective. and not just be fooled by companies that say, oh, we're running in a FedRAMP data center, but none of their apps actually went through the FedRAMP process. They're just leveraging the infrastructure piece, which is better than nothing, but still look for that entire stack to go through the gauntlet.
Yep. Yeah, the FedRAMP process has been, I'd say, on the whole, very successful. I mean, it's got its issues and challenges, and in many ways it could be improved, but I think I would agree that it's set a high bar and a good bar for the industry. And we see even in commercial customers or even customers outside the United States are often thinking and talking about FedRAMP, looking at the controls, looking at the model, and actually getting assurance and trust from the fact that this very intense scrutiny has occurred. And it is pretty intense, I must say. We do a lot of certifications and audits, but that's certainly one of the most intense ones with the greatest amount of evidence produced. Another thing that's interesting that you've experienced too is that, remember, the government was always certifying itself in the past and naturally would give itself exceptions. You'd have a list of poems. It's like, hey, this isn't quite right, but we'll get to it, right? And that's not unreasonable. It's a risk assessment, right? It's value versus risk. But when you're doing it more generically, the tendency is to say, you know what, even though our office is called the Federal Risk and whatever Compliance Office, is like, we don't really want to take any risks. We just want you to meet all the controls and not have any exceptions. So that's been actually challenging in a way and sometimes frustrating, but also very, I think, good and healthy from the vendor side to just say, okay, fine, sort of these almost like exceptionless norms, if you will, and around the systems that previously people were willing to grant some exceptions around. So that's, I think, an interesting boat that's, tide that's raising all the boats to some extent as well. How does FedRAMP affect, I know you've gone through the process, how about folks from other companies? Is that something that you are looking at or you're hearing about from your customer base? Kathy, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so for our Splunk Cloud service, we actually are going through the FedRAMP process right now, actively. So expect to have that pretty soon. But I have to say, as a former CISO, compliance is very tricky because a lot of people think that it's about checking the boxes, right? But I have a very technical hands-on background and in a very operational capability. And if you tell me I need to have a IDS in the environment, I can put one in, but what am I going to do with that data, right? Am I monitoring actively? Am I responding based on what I see there? That's why I think that people are following checkboxes that are in the CISO role, but they're not necessarily following it in the spirit of where it was intended to be. And that's one area that kind of frustrates me when I see that that's being done. And I really try not to go in that direction, but I see it too often. So.
Yeah, it's a good point. And sometimes people perhaps have been a little bit too rule-bound. So like there might be some compensating control that makes the overall situation way better, but because you don't meet the letter of the law, people are like, yeah, I don't want to think about it. So it's interesting. But do you think that's changing now? Is there more of one way of describing this issue is, the gap between compliance and security, right? Where security is more like real operational stuff. Compliance has traditionally been more of the checkbox operation. I think those are coming more together, especially with some of the programs and the continuous monitoring models. Is that something that you see as well, or you think there's still a gap there?
Unfortunately, I think it's actually getting worse. And the reason for that is more and more organizations are building their own security programs. And as such, they now need to get CISOs as well. So we have a lot of people coming in that have a policy and governance type of background, but not necessarily a hands-on practitioner background. And that's where the problem is, because if you've never actually worked in the environment before and done incident response and handled those cases, how would you know exactly what context these checkboxes are supposed to be done in, right? So I actually do think it's getting worse. And we need to do a better job spreading that
I'll
message.
share your optimism a little bit. I think for our perspective, we try to help and enable our clients in that continuous monitoring, right? So not only bringing that security to the workload, but also the compliance piece. And I think that is something that I think we are definitely making a lot of progress with our customers. But I think when you look at it, I think going back to what we were saying, even from your log management, it's a much easier, not only from a security perspective, but also from a compliance perspective, going through the multiple audits, right? So how many audits, I mean, in government, you can be going through multiple audits from 5 different other entities, agencies, or organizations, right? So I think enabling that to be able to say, okay, yeah, you need that information, I can run you a report. So I think compliance, you're right, the compliance has always been an afterthought and or the starting point, really not the security function, but the starting point. But I think you're really merging and saying, yeah, we're actually doing security and this is how we can prove it.
So we're getting close to the end, but there's a great theme, I think, that's quite important that we haven't touched on too much yet. We talked a little bit about automation, but that's really the theme around secure DevOps and the creating these systems and bringing together compliance and security in a more unified way. So just to throw out an example, AWS has published something called an enterprise accelerator for NIST compliance, and it's essentially CloudFormation templates and some tools that literally stand up an environment that you can, the 3PAO has actually checked all the boxes on the template. So you actually have audited and certified a pre-created orchestrated cloud platform environment, which is pretty cool. Now, of course, it needs, to really make that real, you've got to create things like around drift detection, remediation, and so forth. And we're working on those things with our partners. But I'd love people to comment more on whether, in fact, automation and the integration of your security team and your compliance team right into, say, a DevOps or CI/CD pipeline, is that really happening? I know some customers are doing that, and it seems to really promise some significant improvements for government customers.
Yeah, for us, we actually working with AWS to be able to do that on high impact systems, right? Developing that quick start program. I think it's critical, right? For not to be able to streamline that process, to be able to, and specifically with high impact systems, being able to really provision security and compliance on all your workloads in such a way at the high level, right? So I think that is an incredible, advancement that we've just seen or are actually getting to. So I think incrementally, I think as we talk about cloud adoption and making progress and really in the public sector, I think when the compliance piece really becomes the easy button, to where you're actually being able to provide it very quickly, and I think that's where the cloud piece really starts taking off.
And I would say, why reinvent the wheel? I agree, and I think that if you have this template, people can ask themselves again, if you rewound 10 years and said, when you went to deploy a perimeter firewall or some sort of endpoint security solution, did you just take a template from somebody, one of your peer organizations? That could never happen. Mm-hmm. So now at least to provide those building blocks that are in, because of the public cloud, available to be withdrawn, pulled down, customized to some extent, but at least not have to go back and start this building from zero. I don't know what the architecture is supposed to look like or the design. Here's a great reference architecture, and here are the things that you will need, maybe you didn't think of, that someone's done before. So I do think, again, that just adds a nice little stepping stone for people to reach even higher.
So on the theme of automation, Kathy, anything?
So automation is very, very important in an operational context, right? You don't want to have tier 1 and tier 2 analysts do everything manually. What you want, ideally, is for most of the analysts to be focused on specialized work. So maybe forensics, maybe doing malware reverse engineering, doing threat intel. You don't want them to be handing tickets. That's not a good use of their time. And it also fosters more turnover in the environment because people don't like doing that day in and day out. So automating is very, very important, and there's 2 ways to do that trending right now. And one is with a more of a centralized approach where all of the security devices can talk to a central point that has rules-based engines to respond back, and then have those devices add rules or block certain actions or that type of thing. And then the other way is to use a machine learning type approach, do your network baselining and analysis, and look for meaningful threats and findings to pop up to the analysts so they don't spend so much of their time just looking through logs for certain correlations. So I see that as being kind of SOC future, and that's where it needs to go from an automation standpoint.
And I'd just add, on an automation perspective, it's important not only from the detective side to be able to monitor and see what's going on, but anything that you can do to automate the protection side, especially when it comes to protecting high-value assets, which is a hot topic right now in government, as folks have gone around and find the PII, PHI, IP, other sensitive information. Anything that you can do to make it easier for the end users to automate the process of using security on all those high-value assets, the end users will be very appreciative of that. And if you proactively get that additional security on there, hopefully that reduces the backlog of the detective security controls that you have to track down as well.
So echoing back on the theme of automation, I feel like I'm hearing three kind of sub-themes which I think are worth highlighting. One is, how can we better automate the building and deployment of systems that have in place the things that we believe are needed to protect them? Once they're deployed, we need to be able to automate the reactions that we have to the threats that then still nevertheless occur and maybe at times get some foothold. And the theme around data protection is a really important one as well, because I think there is an increasing trend or a realization that you can build these super secure systems, but at some point someone clicks and downloads something, and then you really want to still have some control over access to the data as it exits an otherwise highly secure system. So those are, I think, all great themes and all important areas of innovation. So I really want to thank the panel for coming here today, for giving us their wisdom and insights, and appreciate you folks being here. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.